another area where we believe there are enormous potentials in these new technologies of learning is what we call collaborative intelligence. Again, I want to emphasize that point of affordance. The opposite of collaborative intelligence is individual intelligence. Here's classic individual intelligence. I watch my video delivered through an e-learning platform. It's the flipped classroom, so-called. Somebody's recorded a lecture for me, and I watch the lecture which they've recorded for me, and then I do a quiz which tries to identify what I've remembered of that video or what I've understood of that video. Okay, so here we've used something very radical, technology, web delivered perhaps, and we've done something very innovative, a flipped classroom. But in terms of the kinds of intelligence that I'm using, it's just the traditional idea of individual intelligence, the stuff I can hold in my head and demonstrate that I've held in my head. So here we've got technology and it's doing nothing new. It's doing the same thing that a teacher lecture did, and it's doing the same thing that a textbook did. So my question then is, what is collective intelligence? What is collaborative learning? And what's different about it? And what I'll do is I will come back to my example of students doing volcanoes, a volcano project in the classroom. So what we're doing is the intelligence that we're demonstrating when we do that, when we offer that, when we do that project, is intelligence which is collective in two very important senses. The first sense is, I couldn't write it if I hadn't sourced a whole lot of stuff. I've found videos, I've read articles, I've searched the web, I've collected stuff. And don't pretend that anything about volcanoes is stuff that's in my head. It's a social inheritance, and what it's about is demonstrating my capacity to use that social inheritance. So the social inheritance is the structure of a scientific report, the structure of a geographical report, and then all the evidence and the empirical matter that I find to put into that which I've collected, right? So in a sense, what I've done, it's a unique project. Nobody's ever written this particular project before. It says something about me. It says something about my capacities. It's very much my own work, right? But it's also the product of the collectivity, which is the information resources around us and the conceptual resources that we've developed around the practices of science and or the practices of geography. Okay, so it's collective in that sense, and don't try and pretend it's individual. It's about the way in which I source or recognize that collective inheritance. You know, it's like the wonderful phrase of Isaac Newton's, which is, he said, look, you know, that what we do is we stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, yes, we've innovated stuff, but we have to recognize that we're standing on other people's shoulders in all knowledge work, all learning, all intellectual work. So it's about acknowledging that. Now, you know, if you do a test which just says, you know, yes, I got this answer right, it assumes that it's your answer, an individual answer. It doesn't actually go back and trace the collective provenance of all knowledge. So that's the first point. The second point is that in these new media environments, we can build highly collaborative processes of learning where, in fact, it's not just your own work. Remember the old day where you sort of put your hand like this so the person beside you wouldn't see your work, right, in the old days? It's not like that. It's actually deliberately producing work that others are to review, others are to give you feedback on, and the result of that is by the time you've got feedback, perhaps from multiple perspectives amongst your peers, and then you've done a revision, the quality of the revision is partly due to the quality of the feedback you've received, and the quality of other people's work is partly the result of the feedback you've given them. So you're in a collaborative process of give and take around knowledge. Now, you know, I would argue that this is exactly the kind of person we need for the workplace of the near future, the scientist of the near future, the teacher of the near future. These are the kinds of people we want to develop who can work in these highly collaborative, constructive relationships with other team members, with peers, and so on. So what we're then doing is, now, The question then is, okay, the final product, well, whose is it? Who are we going to give the mark to? Because it's been a collective process where other people have helped you. Well, you know, the thing about these e-learning environments, via version controlling, you can actually track exactly all the feedback that was given and the extent to which you took on other people's feedback. Now, we might actually then value the extent to which you took other peers' comments seriously and you took on board their feedback. And rather than saying, oh, you copied something that someone else gave you the idea or you copied it, we might say, well, what a great thing that you took on board this constructive criticism and you reworked your work based on that constructive criticism. And we might say, oh my goodness, that was fantastic feedback you gave to that other person. And we're going to value that. So we're going to assess not just the work you do individually, but because we can see all the changes you've made, we can see all the comments you've made, the changes you take on board, we can value your work as a collaborative player in a knowledge environment. So in a sense, these are these two quite fundamental aspects of what I call collective intelligence. Now, this is a really profound shift away from the historical and traditional individualized approach to assessing learning and even defining what learning is. All right, just to mention briefly, off on a tangent, some of my educational heroes, which are sort of on the sidelines. This particular hero here is Maria Montessori, a very, very important person in the history of education. And in a way, a lot of what we're trying to do aspirationally in these learning environments are ideas that, you know, she invented and thought through at the beginning of the 20th century. So in a way, what we're doing with technologies now, you know, are things that have always been a bit hard to do, but in a way, her aspirations back then are things that we now can do somewhat more easily, and therefore we should do them. So what are her ideas? Well, she worked in very, very poor neighborhoods in Rome in the first years of the 20th century, and she built up a system of experiential education where the technologies then were actually artifacts. So rather than learn stuff off by heart, rather than memorize stuff, you work with rods, which actually where you concretely felt geometrical concepts. You had maps of the world where you moved the things around, where students worked in little activity groups. So what there was around a Montessori classroom, people probably know this pretty well, but there are different stations, activity stations, where small groups of students work on particular activities. Now, in the traditional classroom, this wasn't that easy to do. In fact, it's ideally suited for very young children, and that's why it was adopted to a large degree with younger children. But it became impractical for logistical reasons with older children. But now what we're saying is, look, a lot of these ideals around experience, around group work, around active learning that she was devising and thinking about over 100 years ago are things now which we can do very nicely in our e-learning environments.